Years ago, my parents looked me in the eye and told me I was no longer their son because I refused to hand over my life savings to bail out my sister's failed dream. They cut me out without hesitation. Now, after all that silence, they came back demanding I sell the house I worked years to buy to cover her $260,000 debt. When I said no, they broke into my home, tore it apart, and left one word smeared across my wall: selfish. But what they didn't know was that this house carried a secret that would change everything. I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, I'd love to know you're here with me. Just say hi or listening in the comments, or let me know where you're from. Love seeing how far my story can reach. Sometimes, even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now let me tell you everything. And please, if my story touches you, consider subscribing to this channel. It helps me share more. And maybe together we can make sure no one else feels as alone as I once did. My name is Eric Calder, 31 years old, and for the first time in my life, I had built something no one could take from me. A craftsman bungalow from 1924 in Savannah, Georgia, with a wide oak porch and stained glass windows that caught the late sun like fragments of a cathedral. Every beam, every brush of paint, every cabinet I refinished with my own hands, carried the weight of nights I spent alone, rejected, and determined to prove that I could stand without them. My neighbors, Mrs. Wickham with her pies and Mr. Dillard with his toolbox, treated me like kin in ways my own blood never did. On that porch, I felt safe after years of silence from the people who were supposed to be my family. Years earlier, that silence had begun with a single word: no. My sister Vesper had decided she was destined to be a star in Miami's Wynwood art scene. She found a gallery space, convinced my parents it would change everything, and when they emptied their savings into her dream, she turned to me. $30,000, she said, as if it were spare change. I asked her for a plan, something on paper that showed how she'd make it work, but she took offense. My father, Benton, told me flatly, "It's family or money." My mother, Mara, stood behind him like an echo. I chose to keep what I had scraped together, and that was enough for them to cut me out as though I'd never existed. Calls went unanswered, holidays passed with empty chairs. My name was erased from their lives. I had survived the exile. I had made peace with the ache. Or so I thought, until an ordinary Tuesday night when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost let it ring out, but something in my gut told me to answer. "Eric, sweetheart," came a voice I hadn't heard in half a decade. My mother's tone was syrupy light, as if the years hadn't happened. "It's Mom. Your dad and I miss you. Why don't you come home for dinner Friday?" For a moment I couldn't speak. No apology, no mention of the years they left me behind. Just an invitation, spoken like the past was nothing but a dream. My heart squeezed with something between longing and suspicion, muttered an agreement, more out of shock than decision. And when the call ended, I sat in the silence of my kitchen, hearing only the hum of the fridge and the thud of my own pulse. That night, lying awake, I remembered the Thanksgiving I spent alone eating takeout while their table was full. Why now? Why come back after all this time? The question pressed on me like a weight as sleep refused to come. The house I grew up in sat in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, a place that once seemed sturdy and warm. When I pulled into the driveway that Friday, I barely recognized it. Paint peeled from the siding. Weeds strangled the flower beds my mother used to fuss over, and the air felt heavy with neglect. Inside, the air was scented with too much perfume, as if trying to mask something sour. My father greeted me with a stiff smile, my mother with a chirp of forced cheer, both acting as though 5 years of silence could be erased with a handshake. The dining table was set. Though thinner than I remembered, cheaper chairs replaced the oak set we once had. Family portraits hung in discount frames where oil paintings used to hang. They asked me about work, about whether I was still single, about my life in Savannah. I answered carefully, dodging details, revealing nothing about promotion, savings, or the house I treasured. Their questions felt less like curiosity and more like accounting. Halfway through the meal, the front door swung open and in breezed Vesper, late as always, dramatic as ever. She wore a designer dress that screamed money. Her hair was perfect, her laugh too loud. She kissed our parents' cheeks, then flung her arms around me as though 5 years of silence had been my fault. "Eric, look at you all grown up in corporate," she said. "I've missed you," she said, but her eyes glimmered with calculation. The performance continued as we ate. She bragged about rubbing elbows with artists and celebrities, about her boutique in the city, about the aesthetic her clients demanded. I listened, each word scraping like sandpaper, waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then it did. My father set down his fork, his voice turning serious. "Your sister's business is in crisis. It needs $260,000 to survive." The number slammed into me like a brick. Before I could process it, Vesper leaned forward, her voice sharp with entitlement. "You already own a house, Eric. Sell it, pay off the debt, and you can still buy yourself a condo. It's simple." The room tilted. My mother clutched Vesper's hand, her eyes wet. "Family helps family," she whispered. The same line I'd heard 5 years ago when they threw me out of their lives. The déjà vu was suffocating. I pushed my chair back, my pulse hammering. That house is the result of every sacrifice I've made. I won't sell it to pay off anyone's debt. The mask slipped. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's tears spilled. Vesper's face twisted in scorn. The air turned sharp, thick with unspoken threats. I saw it clearly then. The dinner wasn't about reconciliation, it was a stage, and I was the audience for their performance. A performance meant to corner me into giving up the one thing I had built for myself. And in that moment, I knew something darker was waiting just beyond the curtain. It had been only a few weeks since the dinner in Cedar Rapids when the knock came at my door in Savannah. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I opened it to see Benton and Mara standing on my porch, a chill ran down my spine. They smiled like tourists arriving for a casual visit. "We just wanted to see the home our son has built," my mother said sweetly. My father added, "It's been too long, Eric, let us in." I hesitated, torn between slamming the door and giving them a chance. Against my better judgment, I let them inside. The house had always been my sanctuary, but with them stepping over the threshold, it felt like the walls themselves tightened. They walked slowly from room to room, praising everything in tones that rang hollow. My mother admired the oak porch I had restored, the vegetable garden where tomatoes hung in clusters, the light spilling through the stained glass windows. My father nodded at the brick fireplace as though appraising it, yet their eyes betrayed them. Every glance lingered too long, too calculating. In the living room, Mara ran her fingers over the shelves, pausing at the cabinet where I kept important files. "Such a tidy office," she said, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. She leaned closer to the desk, looking at the stack of folders as though reading the labels. Benton crouched near the closet, noting the file boxes stacked neatly. "Always so organized," he muttered. When we passed the back door, my mother paused, her gaze flicking toward the key rack. I caught her eyes darting between the keys and my face. As we circled back to the kitchen, she asked lightly, "Is this where you keep your mortgage papers too?" Her words slid out as if she didn't realize how invasive they sounded. My father followed with his own suggestion, voice heavy with meaning. "You wouldn't even have to sell. Eric, you could just borrow against the house. A simple loan. Vesper gets back on her feet and you still keep your home." I froze, the air thick with the realization. The visit wasn't about pride or reconnection. It was reconnaissance. They weren't here as parents. They were here as strategists. That night, long after they left, I sat at my desk staring at the empty key hook where I'd moved my spare. My chest tightened with dread. I called Dr. Crowell the next morning, needing to unburden myself. It felt like they weren't visiting. I admitted. They were casing the place. They know where I keep things. They know what this house means to me. Dr. Crowell's voice was calm but firm. "Eric, you've worked so hard to build a safe place for yourself. It's time you consider how to protect it. Boundaries aren't just emotional. They have to be physical, too. Do you have those boundaries set yet?" I didn't, and for the first time I realized how urgently I needed them. It was a Thursday night when the unease I had carried for weeks turned into reality. Work had run late, and by the time I pulled into the driveway, the sky was dark. As I walked toward the porch, I saw the front door, not closed, but slightly ajar. My pulse spiked. I approached slowly, each step heavier than the last, and from inside came the muffled sounds of movement. Drawers slamming, objects clattering, voices I knew too well. I pushed the door open, and the sight before me nearly stole my breath. The living room lay in ruin. Books ripped from shelves, couch cushions slashed, picture frames shattered on the floor. Across the wall, scrawled in red lipstick, was a single word: selfish. "Eric!" My father's voice came from the office. I followed it, and there they were, Benton with his hands in my desk drawers, Mara rifling through my filing cabinet, and Vesper clutching a folder, the folder that held my mortgage documents. "We're just trying to save this family," Mara said, as if she were explaining a misunderstanding instead of standing in the middle of a crime scene. Benton straightened up, holding papers like evidence in his hands. "You've been blessed. Son, it's time you finally give back." I pulled my phone from my pocket, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. My father chuckled, the sound dark and mocking. "You won't do that. They won't do anything. We're family." "You think everything you have came from us?" My mother added sharply, her voice stripped of any softness. "Without us, he wouldn't even exist. You owe us everything." Vesper slammed the folder down on the desk, her face flushed with fury. $260,000 is nothing compared to this house. Don't act like it's impossible." Something in me snapped. I stepped between them and the door, my voice steady though my body shook. "You broke into my house. You destroyed my things. This isn't family, it's criminal, and I will press charges." Blue and red lights washed over the windows as sirens grew louder. Outside, a sharp knock rattled the doorframe, a voice commanding, "Police, open up." I looked at my parents, their faces caught between arrogance and fear, and said the words I'd held in for years. "They're not guests. They're intruders." When the flashing lights faded, and the officers finally drove my parents and Vesper away for questioning, silence fell over the house. It wasn't the calm silence I used to cherish here, but a hollow, broken quiet filled with the echo of shattered glass and torn fabric. I stood in the center of my living room, staring at the wreckage. The words smeared across the wall in lipstick seemed to pulse in the dim light. Selfish. My body trembled with rage, with grief, with something that felt dangerously close to despair. Yet underneath the shock, a decision hardened. I couldn't allow this to happen again. If they had crossed the line once, they would cross it again. Unless I did something more than just lock the doors. I needed to arm myself with the only weapon they seemed to respect: law. The next morning, as I began cleaning up the destruction, I noticed a folder wedged behind my desk, knocked loose during their frantic search. I bent to pick it up, brushing off dust and shards of broken frame glass. When I opened it, recognition hit me. The certificate of historical designation stamped by the Savannah Historic Preservation Society. I'd nearly forgotten about it. When I bought the house, the realtor mentioned its inclusion on the city's registry, noting its architectural significance as a 1924 craftsman, built by a well-known local builder. At the time, I thought of it as an interesting detail, a charming quirk that explained the care lavished on its woodwork and stained glass windows. But now, as I read through the language again, its true power unfolded before me. The document spelled it out clearly. The property could not be sold without review and approval, and even then, any buyer would be bound to preservation restrictions. Structural features, original windows, woodwork, and layout could not be altered. I sat back hard in the chair. They had been searching for this. If they had gotten their hands on it, they could have tried to find loopholes or worse, forge paperwork to bypass the restrictions. Without the certificate, they might have convinced someone to process a quick sale or push me into a fraudulent loan. The realization chilled me deeper than the vandalism. And this wasn't just desperation, this was a calculated attempt to seize control of my house at its roots, its legal foundation. My parents didn't just want my help, they wanted to dismantle the life I had built. I scanned the damage in the room again, but this time with different eyes. Every overturned drawer, every cushion ripped open wasn't random destruction. They had been hunting, methodical in their search. My sanctuary had been violated, not by accident but by intent. That afternoon, I called Ariel Monk, a lawyer I'd been referred to by a colleague, one who specialized in both real estate and family disputes. Sitting across from her polished desk, I laid out everything, the break-in, the harassment, the certificate. She examined the papers carefully, then looked me dead in the eye. "This isn't just family drama anymore," she said. "This is an attempted financial crime. What they were after would have set you up for fraud on a massive scale." Her words tightened something in my chest. For years, I had told myself I was being paranoid, that my family's rejection was cruel but not dangerous. Now there was no denying it. Ariel outlined the steps clearly: file for a restraining order, prepare documentation for criminal charges, and pursue civil damages for the destruction of property. That night I sat alone on the porch, the certificate heavy in my hands. The oak railing beneath my fingers felt sturdier than ever. For the first time, I saw the house not just as shelter, not just as proof of my independence, but as a shield. Its very designation in law stood between me and their schemes. They could smear me. They could threaten me. They could even break through my doors, but the house itself had rules stronger than blood. Ties. I looked out over the garden, the street quiet beneath the soft glow of street lamps, and whispered to myself, "This house will protect me, not just with its walls and windows, but with the law." 2 weeks later, I found myself walking into the Chatham County Courthouse with a folder so thick it strained the seams. Inside were photos of the destruction, screenshots of threatening texts, videos my neighbors had recorded of the police escorting my family away, and the certificate they had tried to steal. My palms were damp, my heart heavy. But there was no turning back. The courtroom was colder than I expected, sterile and unforgiving. Across the aisle sat Benton, arms crossed, his face carved in stone. Mara clutched a tissue, dabbing at her eyes with practiced precision. Vesper shifted uneasily beside them, her bravado replaced by something rawer, weaker. I had braced myself for anger, for defiance, but I hadn't expected to see fear flicker in her eyes. When it was her turn to speak, the fear spilled over. She broke down in tears, sobbing that the boutique had failed, that she had racked up debt on multiple credit cards, that payday loans with impossible interest had doubled what she owed. The number wasn't just $260,000, it was climbing higher by the day. Her confession silenced the room, but it did nothing to soften me. I had warned her once, years ago, when she demanded $30,000 from me for her gallery. She hadn't learned. My parents took their turn next. Benton's voice was low and heavy. Mara's shook with grief. They admitted to draining their retirement funds, taking out a reverse mortgage on the house in Iowa, selling heirlooms that had been in the family for generations. We had nowhere else to turn. My mother cried, her gaze fixed on me. "You're the only one left who can save us." I felt the eyes of the courtroom shift toward me, waiting for the son's rebuttal, the final act in their performance. But the judge intervened first. His voice was steady, measured, cutting through the theatrics. "Mr. and Mrs. Calder, setting boundaries is not a refusal of family. It is the essence of responsibility. You have mistaken unconditional love for unlimited access, and that is not the same thing." The words landed like a gavel, before the gavel itself even struck. The ruling was swift. A 1-year restraining order. They were forbidden from contacting me directly, from approaching within 500 feet of my home or workplace, from mentioning me on social media. The photographs of the vandalized wall, the word selfish scrawled in red, had made the decision all but inevitable. As the judge's words sank in, Mara's sobs grew louder, Benton's face flushed crimson, and Vesper stared at the table as though the weight of debt had finally settled on her shoulders. I gathered my papers quietly, but before I left, Ariel leaned close and whispered, "This isn't over. They'll face criminal charges next. Be ready." Her words tightened the knot in my chest, but they also steadied me. I wasn't imagining the danger anymore. It was real, and it was far from finished. Outside the courthouse, the air felt lighter. My neighbors had driven in from Savannah to support me. Mrs. Wickham put a hand on my arm. Mr. Dillard gave me a firm nod. Their presence reminded me I wasn't alone, not anymore. As I walked down the courthouse steps, I carried a thought that burned brighter than any anger. Blood ties were no longer the chain binding me. The law was the line that protected me. And for the first time, I believed that line would hold. The letter from the court arrived on a gray morning, tucked between utility bills and junk mail. I slid it open with the same knife I used to cut bread. But the weight of its words cut far deeper. The criminal trial was set. Charges: unlawful entry, property destruction, and attempted fraud involving real estate documents. My hands trembled as I read, because it meant there would be no more pretending this was family conflict. My parents, my own flesh and blood, were about to stand trial as criminals. Relief mixed with dread, like breathing fresh air that burned the lungs. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood polish and nerves. Reporters clustered near the entrance, their cameras flashing at anyone who looked remotely involved. Inside, the benches filled with curious locals. I sat with my attorney, Ariel Monk, while across the aisle my parents sat stiff and defiant. Benton's jaw worked as though he were chewing rocks. Mara dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief in theatrical bursts, and Vesper looked like a wilted flower, her mascara already beginning to smear. When I was called to testify, my voice quavered at first, but steadied as I recounted everything. From the dinner in Cedar Rapids, where they first tried to corner me into selling my house, to the night I came home to find the door ajar. The word selfish smeared across my wall and my family tearing through my office. Every word felt like dragging glass from an open wound, but I kept going because if I faltered, they would twist the silence into justification. Vesper broke down on the stand, sobbing that she had only followed her father's lead. "I didn't know it would turn into this," she wailed. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, but Ariel calmly presented the video footage from my neighbor's security camera, showing her carrying out my documents. Her voice caught clearly on the audio. $260,000 is nothing compared to this house. No one could mistake her part in it. Benton's turn came, and he leaned into the microphone with his voice edged in contempt. We were trying to teach him that family matters more than money. If he had just helped us, none of this would have been necessary. The prosecutor rose smoothly, papers in hand. "So your definition of teaching is breaking into your son's home, vandalizing it, and attempting to forge real estate records?" The silence that followed was louder than any answer Benton could have given. Then Ariel played the card we had held back. She presented the certificate of historical designation, lifting it high for the judge to see. "Even if they had succeeded," she explained, "this house could not have been sold without approval from the Historic Preservation Society. Their efforts were not only criminal, but futile." The judge's expression hardened, his gavel striking like thunder. "Every action you took only deepens your guilt," he declared. The verdict was delivered swiftly. Benton and Mara were given suspended sentences, restitution for the damage, and a renewed prohibition on contact with me. Vesper was ordered into community service and mandatory financial counseling, her debts to be addressed through structured oversight. As the judgment echoed through the room, I sat frozen, my chest heavy with a grief I had carried for too long. I had wanted accountability, and I got it, but seeing my parents labeled criminals, hearing the shuffle of the bailiff's shoes as they were escorted out, it cracked something inside me. When I walked out of the courthouse into the sunlight, the air didn't feel triumphant. It felt like the quiet after a storm that had torn through everything familiar. Still, the house was safe, and so was I. For the first time, I believed no one could take it away. The weeks after the trial unfolded slowly, like a body learning how to heal. Insurance adjusters came and went. Contractors repaired what had been destroyed, and fresh paint covered the scarlet word that once screamed across my wall. I upgraded everything: cameras on each corner of the house, a digital lock on every door, motion sensor lights that flooded the garden with brightness at the slightest stir. The craftsman bungalow became more fortress than home. But with each layer of protection, I felt my breath ease. One afternoon, Ariel handed me an envelope. This came through me first. "As the court required," she said. It was a letter from Vesper. Her handwriting, once flamboyant and careless, now looked small and tight, like someone unsure of her own words. She didn't demand, didn't accuse. She only wrote, "I was wrong. I destroyed more than I can fix. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know I am sorry." I read it once, twice, then folded it and slid it into a drawer. Words alone couldn't undo what she had done. Forgiveness, if it ever came, would have to be earned in ways beyond ink on a page. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned my parents had sold the house in Iowa. They moved into a small apartment, stripped of heirlooms, stripped of pride. No retirement fund left, no gallery dreams, no grandeur. They lived quietly, shadows of who they once were. Hearing it filled me with a complex ache, pity woven with the memory of their betrayal. The wound was still there, but the bleeding had stopped. Life in Savannah took on new rhythms. I hosted my first Friendsgiving, filling the dining room with neighbors and co-workers who brought dishes and laughter. Mrs. Wickham arrived with her pumpkin pie. Mr. Dillard carved the turkey. My colleague Jackson poured wine until glasses clinked. For the first time in years, I looked around a table and saw not performance, not manipulation, but genuine warmth. Later that night, I stepped onto the oak porch, the same spot where so many turning points had begun. Inside, the house glowed with golden light spilling across faces I trusted. Out here, the air was cool and calm, carrying the scent of roasted herbs and pie. I felt a safety that wasn't just about locks and cameras. It was about the people who chose to be here, who lifted me without demanding a price. In my journal, I wrote, "Family isn't blood, family is respect, family is responsibility. I lost the family I was born into, but I've built one of my own." As the night wound down, I sat on the porch steps, the wood warm beneath me. I looked at the home I had fought so hard to protect and whispered almost to myself, "This house doesn't just keep me safe from storms outside. It shields me from storms inside my bloodline, too." The journey was painful, but it was mine, and in that moment, I finally understood what family meant. The year that followed the trial was one of slow repair, not just for the house, but for myself. Fresh paint covered the scars on the walls. New furniture filled the empty spaces where destruction had been, and the hum of cameras outside reminded me that vigilance was now stitched into the fabric of my life. Yet there were nights when I still woke to the memory of that lipstick word bleeding across the living room wall, when the echo of my father's voice, "We made you, you owe us," rattled louder than any storm outside. I learned quickly that healing is not a straight path. There were days when I wanted to pretend none of it had happened, when I longed for the simple comfort of family without all the battles. Then, there were days when anger surged like fire, and I could not believe I had ever wished for reconciliation. Therapy helped me walk that line, taught me that grief and relief could live together in the same body, that it was possible to mourn the parents I wished I had while standing firm against the parents I actually did. One afternoon, Ariel called with news. The civil suit had settled. My insurance covered most of the damages, but the court had ordered additional restitution from my parents. It was a small sum compared to what they had cost me in emotional weight. But seeing the order in writing mattered. It was acknowledgement that what they did was not just cruel, it was unlawful. That recognition steadied me. Meanwhile, whispers of my family's downfall drifted back through mutual acquaintances. Benton had been forced to sell off the last of his workshop tools to cover debts. Mara spent most of her days alone in the apartment. Blinds drawn, Vesper worked long shifts in retail, her once lavish lifestyle reduced to secondhand clothes and bus rides. I did not gloat when I heard it. Strangely, I felt no triumph at their decline. What I felt was distance, like I was watching strangers in a story I used to belong to. The letter from Vesper remained in my drawer, untouched since the day I received it. Sometimes I opened it and read her shaky words, half expecting to feel a shift in my heart. But forgiveness is not something you can summon like a switch. It comes, if it comes, in the small evidence of changed behavior, not in desperate confessions written after a courtroom defeat. Until I saw something more, the letter would stay folded. Life in Savannah grew fuller. Friends filled the spaces once reserved for family. Wickham's pies, Dillard's handyman skills, Jackson's wit at dinner parties. They became threads in a new tapestry of belonging. When Thanksgiving came again, the house overflowed with laughter, the kind that rises freely, not bought with guilt or obligation. Standing at the head of the table, carving a turkey in the dining room I had once feared would never feel whole again, I realized I had not just repaired my house, I had rebuilt my definition of family. Still, the story was not finished. The restraining order reached its final month, and my chest tightened as the expiration date approached. Would they come back? Would they see the end of the order as an invitation to reopen the battle? I carried that unease like a stone until one morning, Ariel handed me another sealed envelope. It was from the court. The order had been extended for 3 more years without contest. My parents had not even shown up to argue. They had faded from the fight entirely. Relief washed over me so strongly it left me weak in the knees. I stepped outside onto the oak porch that had become my anchor and let the Savannah sun warm my face. For the first time in years, I wasn't preparing for another attack. I was simply living. And yet something in me knew the story needed closure. Not just for me, but for the boy I had once been. The boy who spent high school shifts washing dishes to save for college while his sister's recital drew the spotlight. I decided to write one last letter, not to send but to free myself. I sat at my desk, pen in hand, and wrote, "You told me once that family comes before money, but what you meant was that your dreams came before my life. You asked me to sacrifice everything I had built for mistakes that were not mine. I will not carry that burden anymore. This house, this life is proof that I was never selfish. I was simply unwilling to keep bleeding for people who called it love. I hope you find peace in your own way, but I will not come back. My family is here now in Savannah. In the friends who stand by me without asking for my ruin, this is my last word." When I finished, I folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer where Vesper's apology rested. Side by side, they were the two halves of a story. Theirs, demanding and destructive. Mine, resolved and final. That night, I hosted another gathering. The house buzzed with voices and music, plates clinking. Wine poured generously. I slipped outside for a moment onto the porch, lit softly by the glow from inside. The garden swayed in the breeze. The oak railing cooled beneath my hand. I whispered to the night, "Not for anyone else to hear. This house is more than walls. It is the proof that storms can be survived. It is the shield against the family that hurt me and the foundation for the family I chose." The laughter from inside spilled out, warm and real. For the first time, the ache was gone. There was no lingering doubt, no unfinished battle. The house had kept me safe. The law had held the line, and I at last had written the final chapter. I closed the door behind me, and the storm that had haunted me for years stayed outside. Sometimes, I still think about the night I found that word painted on my walls. Selfish, and how much it cut deeper than any vandalism could. It wasn't just an accusation. It was the echo of a lifetime of being told I wasn't enough unless I gave up everything I worked for. For years, I believed that lie. I believed that saying no made me cold, that holding on to what I had earned was a betrayal. It took losing my family, rebuilding my life, and standing in court against my own parents to finally understand the truth. Self-respect is not selfish. Protecting what you've built is not cruelty. Setting boundaries is not abandonment. Looking back now, I realize the house I fought for wasn't only made of wood and glass. It was made of nights spent alone saving every dollar, of learning how to sand floors and paint walls when no one was there to help. Every brick carried the weight of rejection and the stubbornness to keep moving forward. And when my family tried to take it, when they told me again that I owed them everything, the house stood with me. It became a shield, not just in law, but in spirit. I know some people might wonder why I share this story, why I open these wounds in public. It's because I know I'm not the only one who's been told family helps family, when what they really mean is, you exist to be used. I want anyone who's heard those words, anyone who's been shamed for protecting themselves, to hear me clearly. You are not wrong for saying no. You are not wrong for refusing to be broken so that someone else can avoid consequences. If you've ever felt that tension between love and survival, between loyalty and self-respect, then I hope my story shows you that it's possible to choose yourself and still create a life filled with connection. Because family isn't about blood, family is about respect. It's about people who stand beside you without demanding your ruin. I lost the family I was born into, but I gained a community that lifts me higher than I ever thought I could rise. And now, if my words reached you, I ask for something simple. Let me know you're here. Say hi in the comments or tell me where you're listening from. Sometimes, even the smallest connection can turn a lonely story into one that feels heard. If this story meant something to you, subscribe to the channel because I have more to share. Your support keeps these stories alive, and it lets me know that telling the truth matters. Thank you for listening, for sitting with me through the hardest chapters of my life. Thank you for letting me prove not only to myself but to anyone watching that survival is possible and dignity is worth defending. And thank you for helping me turn pain into something bigger than silence. This was my storm. Now it's behind me.